everyone, and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm continuing the process of turning my Animal Crossing villagers from New Horizons into human versions of themselves, and sharing the process of how I made each of their artworks and what obstacles I ran into. If you missed last week's video, there will be a link in the iCard above, and I'll also have a playlist on the end screen of this video so you can check out the other characters I made. So next up on the list is my other starting villager, Fuchsia. Fuchsia is a sisterly type of villager, so I wanted her to appear warm and inviting, but she does have a certain alternative vibe to her that I wanted to incorporate into her human design. The game model of Fuchsia has only the front part of her bangs when it comes to hair, so when I sketched out some ideas, I thought maybe having her hair up in a bun might help convey that. Also, to add to the rebel alternative look, I wanted to give her an undercut. Another idea I had for her hair was to have it up in a half ponytail. I'm not sure if this has a specific name, but I'll put some pictures on screen so you know what I'm talking about. Ultimately, I landed on giving her a messy bun and having it tied up with the blue ribbon to look like the ears from the game. When it came to her dress, I thought about either keeping it as is or splitting it into two pieces, having a sort of tank top and skirt combination with some leggings. I felt like this drifted away too much from the original design, and I wanted to see if I could make a longer looking dress work for her. As for the pose, I originally had Fuchsia fixing her hair, then had her sitting down next to all of her plants that I decorated the outside of her house with, but I felt like having her sit and interacting with the background elements wouldn't match with the other ideas I had for the remaining characters, so for consistency's sake, I ended up posing her arms crossed and giving her a wide stance with a smile. I actually got the inspiration for the pose from a picture off Shutterstock, which had this woman arms crossed with a disapproving expression. The overall pose just reminded me of how an older sibling or a mom might give you the look to get you to behave, which I thought fit Fuchsia's sisterly personality perfectly. I don't see her as an overly upset character though, so taking the body language from the reference and tweaking it to fit Fuchsia better, I ended up with the pose that you see now. And like with Dom's artwork, I did end up using my body chan model to help me get the pose right. The pose itself wasn't that difficult to draw, so I didn't take a picture of the model, but I just wanted to let you guys know that I did use it for this artwork. As always, I didn't record the sketching phase, but we'll jump right into the line art process. You'll notice that I end up giving Fuchsia these two strands of hair on the side of her face. The one on the left was in my original sketch, but I got the idea from one of my references. In the end, I liked my original design, and you'll see it change eventually. As for the background, I like to repeat myself and say that I did in fact trace it. I took a screenshot of Fuchsia's house in-game and brought it into Sai. I did have to move some of the furniture over in the picture to fill up some of the empty space, and so you can see which objects I decorated with. My main focus was really on redesigning the character, so I didn't feel too bad about tracing the background. And honestly, I think it's better than having her float in an empty space. And when it came to doing the line art for the background, I used a clear ruler on top of my display tablet to help me get straight lines, since Sai version 1 doesn't have a great way to make straight lines very quickly. I do still need some practice with keeping the ruler straight, but that's just something I can work out over time. Something special I did for this video is that not only did I record the entire process for the speed paint portion, but I also recorded many update segments in which I talk about what I've done so far and where I think the piece is headed. I hope that including these will also give you guys more insight into how I work, and show you as well that making art isn't as always easy as it seems, but we just need to keep going. Okay guys, so this is something I wanted to do in my first video. I wanted to have little small updates as I worked on the art piece, but of course due to time constraints I wasn't able to do that, but I'm going to go ahead and do that now. So I didn't record my process of doing the flats, which is what we're looking at right now. So I mean, it's pretty basic. I mean, there isn't too much to talk about. I am still kind of wondering if I should lighten her skin a little bit, because in my mind, I didn't want to make Fuchsia too light-skinned, just because I didn't want her to look like a similar tone to Dom. Whenever I talk to Fuchsia in the game, she always talks about gardening and plants and stuff like that, and she just seems like sort of a character that would be outside a lot, in my opinion. So for her skin, I thought maybe she could be white, but maybe she's just really tan, or she could be of maybe Latin, Hispanic, whatever, Mexican descent. You know what? Like she has some of that in her blood. Maybe she could be mixed, so her skin tone is slightly darker. Either way, I haven't really decided on sort of, you know, where she falls on that. I mean, I guess it doesn't really matter, but like with the Dom's picture, it does look pretty. I mean, obviously these are the flat colors and it's making the picture itself look very flat. So I'll see what happens whenever I start to color it. I am working on the way that I color my pictures. I am trying to experiment a little bit and get more of a comic book feel to my drawings. So we'll have to see how that turns out. So I'll see you guys in the next update. Now we jump into the coloring. For whatever reason, coloring in Fuchsia's skin was giving me some issues. I think a combination of overblending, using a darker shade for her skin tone, and not properly putting the shadows in the right spot really held up the process. I believe I recolored about 3 or 4 times before I got something I liked, and I'm using a combination of a solid brush to black out the shadows, the airbrush to help create subtle tone shifts using a cut and grad technique, which I'll explain a little more about that later, and I also use a brush tool to help blend things out further if I need to. Later on in the video, I'll give you guys a little example as to how I go about coloring and give some tips as well. But you can probably see that my first initial coloring of Fuchsia didn't look so great, at least in my opinion. Eventually I go on to make the pattern for the dress. I have a PNG of a grid I found on Google, which I use to help with lettering and other various things, but here I'm using it to help me make the pattern that I need. I make sure to make it bigger than I need so that when I scale it down, it doesn't look bad. It takes some playing around with to get it to look good, plus if you decide you want it to follow the curves of the dress and folds, then that takes some added work. I also try to shade in the dress, but at this point I'm not too happy with where it's at. Okay you guys, so this is the second update that I have. As you can see, I think I've done a lot since the last little session. I've definitely been putting in the hours. In the last one I just showed you the flats, but now here I actually rendered out some things. I don't know, I feel kind of conflicted with the rendering of Fuchsia's face and her dress and everything. Again, it feels very amateurish and it's just not quite what I wanted. And also, you can see I went ahead and I finished the flats for the background, and I was actually trying to experiment with different ways to sort of stylize it. I do feel like, because I did trace the background, I don't necessarily know if I want to go the full like 9 yards on shading the entire thing again, like I do with Dom. So what I actually ended up doing was putting, if you can see on this layer on the side, I put a screen layer, so this is just like the regular colors that I did, and I put a new layer and put it to screen, and I kind of had to mess with some of the mode settings here, but I found that screen worked really well, and I originally had it like a pink color for, you know, fuchsia, but I ended up changing the color, and I liked this I like this color better. I feel like it gives off a cooler mood. Sort of dreamy aesthetic kind of vibe. I don't know. I think it's definitely showing how like contrasting the rendering is for fuchsia. I don't know if that makes sense, but I think if anything it's bringing the coloring style of fuchsia out even more, and I don't necessarily know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. That's where I'm at right now, and I'm going to continue working on this. Okay, so this is the next little update that I'm doing. I think after my second one that I did, I went ahead and took a break. I got something to eat. And as I was eating, I was just kind of fumbling around in my brain about how I can go about getting better at the coloring that I want to do. It wasn't really coming together with fuchsia at all. So the reason why we're looking at this is because I actually took a screenshot of a past video that I did, which was my 2500 challenge May review video. And in that video, I just cover all of the faces and heads that I did for the entire month of May. And so I went ahead, let me turn all this off. It looks kind of creepy, but so this was the original screenshot that I took, and this was just a drawing of Professor Lou from Art Prof here on YouTube. And I wanted to see if maybe having a picture, like having a reference for how the lighting is supposed to work, would sort of help me in any way. So I went ahead and, did the line art, which wasn't too bad. Anyway, I went ahead and did that, and then of course I went and started doing the coloring. I think that's all the layers. But as you can see, this is obviously the what I did, and then one more layer. There we go. This is what I did, and then the reference is on the right hand side. I'm actually really happy with this one. I think I kind of have a better understanding of sort of like the form and the shadows a bit. I mean, it also helps that I have the reference right next to the picture to sort of, go off of. I also think this is a good opportunity for me to kind of further explain how it is that I color, just in case if any of you are wondering. I try to mention it in some of my speed paint videos, but I think it just all happens so fast that it's just kind of hard to see. But basically, and this isn't necessarily a good example, but what I do is after I'm finished with the line art, I'll just go ahead and make a new layer for every separate element. So the skin is all on one layer, the eyes and facial features are on one layer as well, and then you have the hair, and then of course the highlights and everything have to go above my line art, so that's on its own layer, and I usually do that towards the end. But as you can see here, I have on the left hand side just the base color for the skin itself, and then what I end up doing is, I think what I first end up doing is, let me turn some of this off. So it'll end up looking like this, and then I'll go ahead and do the very bold shadows. I kind of block them out. Anyway, after that, I'll go in and I'll add a new layer, and all of these layers, by the way, are clipped to the base layer. So if you're not really sure what that means, once you have the color of the skin, once it's not going outside of the line art, you can then, I'll do this on another layer, but it's clipped, so that's what the pink line means. It's clipped to this base layer. So if I were to draw over it, it would only go in the areas that have color, and of course, because this is at the very bottom, it's gonna be hidden by this color that I have. But of course, if I want it on the top, I can just move it to the top of the whole clipped tower thing that I have going on. After I have the harsh shadows, I'll then go and do the soft shadows. And for this one, I kind of use a mixture of the airbrush, and I do use a little bit of the cut and grad technique, which is just getting your lasso tool, and let's say this area, for example, I would kind of try to figure out where I think the shadow would go, and do that, and then I would take my airbrush tool, and of course it would be bigger, let's see, so it'd be maybe something like this, and using my tablet and the pressure, I would just very subtly try to add in the tone, and it's just a push and pull from there, really. I mean, I'll use the airbrush to get subtle shifts in tone, and then if I need to blend something, so for instance, you have this very harsh outline, you may not necessarily want that, but I also have my my brush tool here for blending even further, sort of like painting. And one advantage to doing your layers like this, or your shading like this, I should say, one advantage is that if you went too far with the shadows and you want to pull it back a little bit, you can definitely, this probably won't be the best example, but I have my brush tool, and if you guys don't know about this little square thing in Sai, this thing was kind of like a game changer for me a little bit, because what this does is that instead of painting with color, it'll actually paint with transparency, and so it'll take away the color is essentially what it's doing, but it'll have the properties of whatever brush that you're using. So I'm using my mouse right now, so it's not going to be the best example. But let's say I wanted this to be even lighter. Depending on what your base color is, you can then go and, you know, do this, and then you can see it's not painting with any color. It's actually just removing the color. It's painting with transparency, but it'll still have the same effects as your brush. And especially if you have a tablet, the pressure and everything will apply as well. So I kind of work between adding color and removing color with the transparency. Hopefully this gives you a little more understanding as to how I'm currently coloring. Okay, so this is update number 4. You may notice that I recolored Fuchsia's skin. I did express in other updates that I wasn't very happy with how the coloring turned out, and I think this one actually looks a little bit better. And the only thing about it is that I didn't record it. I was just sort of experimenting, I suppose. I didn't really want to bore you guys with another sort of time lapse of me recoloring the skin. But of course, this was the time when it actually turned out, you know, somewhat decent, in my opinion. This is just what it looks like. You can see that I took away the pattern of the dress. I made the base color of the dress a little bit darker. I'm gonna go ahead and reapply the pattern and hopefully follow the shape of the dress maybe a little bit more and shade the dress a little bit better. So anyway, I think it's looking better. I'm hoping to just, you know, kind of finish this either by the end of the night or at least get somewhat close to finishing it. And then I still have to tackle the background, which I think I may just add a few simple shadows here and there. Something, you know, nothing too blended or anything like that. And then I'll be able to call it done. So we'll see what happens. So now I'm recoloring Fuchsia's hair and trying to get the right amount of detail. I feel like with art, it's just a push and pull until you get something that looks good. And I think that pretty much sums up how each and every one of my artworks goes. I made the base layer of the dress darker because I felt like I was having trouble getting the shading right when working from light to dark, so I flipped it and worked from dark to light. Using the same airbrush and blending brush, I added and subtracted color, but still felt it looked overblended and weird. I think if you make the shadows too contrasting, then the fabric looks like it's stiff and not flowing. Eventually I go back and redo the dress yet again, but this time keep in mind the lighting and the way the dress should be flowing. Using the cut and grad technique, I create soft transitions between the folds to help give the dress definition. I try not to make the darkest parts too dark or the contrast of it will throw off the picture, like we saw before. And I do throw in some highlights, but I try not to make them overbearing. From there, I reapply the pattern and break it up to help the shapes contour the shape of the dress slightly. It's not exact, but it works. Because of the way I shaded the dress, when I reapplied the pattern, I had trouble getting it to overlay correctly with the shadows and the highlights. So the pattern actually sits on top of the shadows, but below the highlights. It's not perfect, but honestly, I just wanted to move on. I don't think I mentioned either, but for Fuchsia's shoes, I actually found these really awesome pair of Converse that basically has Fuchsia's pink colors on them, so I wanted to incorporate them into the drawing. After I finished with Fuchsia, it was finally time to tackle the background, and because I didn't want another headache like the one Dom's picture gave me, I decided to simplify it. Normally when I shade things, like I said, I have everything on its own layer, but this time around I only used one layer for the majority of the background shadows. I just changed the color as needed depending on what I was coloring. Needless to say, I was basically abusing the hue and saturation filter to get the colors right. There isn't too much to say about the background. I do really love how the wreath came out, and I did experiment with how I shaded the hedges by the house, just to have a little more texture. Shading the terrarium was actually pretty fun too. All I did was put gradients for the succulents, then shaded them like normal. And then on a new layer, I put a blue color and set it to overlay to give me the glass effect. Then I just went to my highlight layer and added some shine to the glass. When it came to the green chair, table, and watering can, I think it still shows how I picked such dark and desaturated colors, so I did spend some time adjusting the base layer and the shading layer until they looked right. For the wooden floor, I went back and drew some vertical lines so I could go and make the wood paneling. I made sure not to leave too many of my original lines or else it would look too perfect. It was pretty tedious, but it was worth it in the end. Plus, to pass the time, I was actually listening to one of Holly Brown's live streams, so all in all, it wasn't too bad. And in the final stretch, I just needed to add some cast shadows to everything. I had to remember the closer the shadow is to the object, the sharper it'll be, so I did use my airbrush to help blend out some of the edges that would be far away. I also added a water texture to the bird bath, which in my opinion I think makes it look even better. The pattern itself was a little weird to draw, and I did actually have to look up some pictures on Google so I could achieve it. After that, I used a bold brush to block in some rock shapes for the pathway. I did have to adjust the perspective to get it right, and afterward, I actually flipped the base layer color and shading color so I was working from dark to light again. Something I wanted to include in Dom's artwork, but didn't get around to it, was a little speech bubble like the ones in game. Each character was going to say a little thing and sort of have their signature catchphrase. So for Fuchsia, she says precious. Then I just sign it and I call it done. I do take the whole thing into a separate program to add the blur effect to the background, but I didn't feel like that was necessary to show. This is what I originally wanted the first video to be like, but I do hope you guys learned some things and found this entertaining. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comments below and I'll answer them as soon as I can. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I will see you in the next one. Bye guys! Thank you so much for watching. I post new art videos every other Wednesday, so consider subscribing to the channel by clicking my logo on the screen or the subscribe button down below. If you'd like to further support this channel and me, you can buy me a Ko-fi in the link below, and anyone who donates gets a shout out at the end of my videos. Thanks guys!